Press. On behalf of Oxfam in the Pacific and the two speakers and myself, just to say welcome, very, very warm Pacific greetings to everyone who's joining us from around the Pacific as well as in Australia. We hear that Melbourne is very cold. We hope to send some warmness over there. My name is Chantel Khan. I'm with the Social Empowerment Education Program. We're also an NGO locally based here in Fiji. And I'm very happy to be here to moderate this this dialogue for Oxfam in the Pacific this morning. We have a very interesting, complex topic. It's intriguing in the sense that while there will be descriptions on human rights abuses and statistics that continue to confirm what you and I see on social media postings on a daily basis, this dialogue brings in the element of accountability as well. But not for governments or even freedom fighters and movements, no. This dialogue questions the international NGO during this violent struggle that is mostly toward Indigenous people. So what I'm going to do now is just give a little bit of a scene setting. I hope not to take up too much of our time because we need to get to the very exciting speakers that we have lined up and your questions and answer session. But just to give a bit of a context, when we're talking about self-determination, what is this ongoing struggle for self-determination that we are so up in arms about? For Indigenous groups globally or any group seeking to decide on their own future, the choices, whether development, political, or both, the struggle for self-determination is real. Even here in the Pacific and in many countries, we are already independent, including Fiji, having gained ours in 1970. So the fact that Fiji is independent, and now the fact that we've had coups, we are deeply militarized, we still struggle with the concept of a robust democracy. It's almost besides the point when we're talking about self-determination. The main thing to remember is that despite all the upheavals that a country like Fiji goes through, we get to decide how we are going to go about resolving our issues as a nation. But not so for our brothers and sisters in other parts of the Pacific and in parts of the world. Their struggle, and now our struggle, for their self-determination to enjoy what you and I enjoy, their struggle has become messier. It's ongoing, and now, as we move more into this unrestrained, globalized, capitalist world, it's become overtly hostile. It's arguably the postmodern form of colonization, but now with social media, the world has become its unwilling witness. For INGOs, or international NGOs, it's a little bit about them. From my understanding, they traverse country boundaries, operating across countries, regions, and even continents. And they usually have the budget to do so. It is assumed that INGOs are well-heeled and resourced and prepared to work in different countries, their cultures, and religious groupings, serving people needing in forms of various assistance. In the Pacific, we are not immune to these INGOs who enter spaces alongside local and/or regional NGOs, sometimes working collaboratively, sometimes not, sometimes as funders, sometimes as implementers, sometimes confused. When it comes to the very hard issue of self-determination, the question is there a consistent visibility as we see when the discussion is about climate change, LGBT rights, even seabed mining? Are they as loud on self-determination as they are on other rights? You'll be the judge of that, and we'll hear more from our speakers. I'm going to turn our attention now to the areas that we're going to be focusing on. And the topic has Gaza and West Papua, but we're going to add, obviously, we need to, Kanaki to this whole discussion. Just a brief about Gaza, only because there's so much information that we have access to. And maybe our speakers are going to give you more nuanced information. So I'll just keep it very brief, just starting from, it goes back a long way. It's very complicated, very complex. Let's go to Gaza. 76 years on from the Nakba, Palestinians continue to demand their right of return after being expelled from their homes during the creation of the Israeli state in 1948. At least 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from Gaza during the creation of Israel. We all remember Resolution 192, the right of return. I apologize, we're just condensing everything. But for the past 8 months, we are now witnessing the forcible displacement of 1.9 million Palestinians in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023. After Palestinian armed groups in Gaza launched their attack on Israel as a form of defense, many would also argue. Extensive damage now to Gaza's infrastructure has precipitated a health crisis, increasing communicable diseases, especially among children, and brought the entire educational system in Gaza to a standstill. So the entire population is now facing a severe food crisis, escalating risk of famine that disproportionately affects vulnerable groups. More than 200 humanitarian workers have been killed, including journalists. That's where we are in Gaza. More recently, we know about ICJ, ICC, and it's ongoing to this day as we have this dialogue. What about what is happening closer to home? We're going to move now to West Papua. And again, I'm aware that we have Rosa here, we have Reverend James. They'll be filling in a lot of this information. I would like just to talk about the context that West Papua is also home to one of the world's largest gold mines and the third largest copper mine, known as Grasberg Mine. Grasberg is majority owned by the American mining firm Freeport, and its reserves estimated to be 100 billion. The company, well, this report says, is also Indonesia's biggest taxpayer. Since Suharto and Indonesia annexed West Papua in 1969, an estimated 500,000 West Papuans have been killed fighting to achieve independence. The controversial omnibus law pushed by the outgoing Indonesian president includes the establishment of large-scale food estates to secure food availability for Indonesia, while providing large areas of West Papua's unused areas to mining, forestry, and infrastructure. This goes on today, the struggles, and we will hear more from Rosa. We have decided for our dialogue this morning that we're also going to talk about Kanaki. Just recently, last week, the French Assembly adopted a bill that expands the right to vote for newer residents of Kanaki, New Caledonia, mostly French nationals. This move is likely to further disenfranchise the indigenous Kanak people at local levels of political representation and in future discussions on decolonization. In protest at this constitutional change, violent unrest has erupted in the capital, Noumea, leaving at least 5 dead so far, including 3 indigenous Kanaki, 2 police officers, and we can read in the papers even today. The French president has declared it a state of emergency. They've banned the social media app TikTok and have deployed hundreds of police reinforcement. The French army may also have been deployed to secure the island's ports and airports. And this is going on again as we are here having this dialogue. I appreciate that the situation of these 3 areas are extremely complex, very long histories of struggle for self-determination. When we're going forward in this discussion, just to bear in mind that while we're talking about this, the element that we're also going to be focusing on is the international INGOs, like Oxfam in the Pacific. As the moderator, I would like to read out a disclaimer to this discussion from Oxfam International. We do not claim to have all the answers. However, we do know that the struggles of indigenous people and local communities in Gaza, West Papua, and Kanaki have largely been a result of political failure from both local and national governments, as well as the international community. All people deserve the right to live lives of dignity, free from harm and abuse. At Oxfam, we believe that the future is equal, and such a future has no space for racism, Islamophobia, or anti-Semitism. It is a future where people in all their diversities are celebrated and where nations' right to self-determination is respected. So, bearing all this in mind, we're going to go forward now. We have more time for discussion and your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers this morning. Our first speaker, which we have 2, is Rosa Moiwend. Rosa is an indigenous West Papuan woman with roots in Malind, Anim, Muyu, and the Mi tribes of southern and highland West Papua. Excuse me, Rosa, if I pronounced all those very well. She is a human rights defender, activist, and feminist, advocating for justice, peace, equality, and self-determination. Embracing principles of non-violent resistance and people power, she strives for positive change. Recently, she joined the Pacific Network on Globalization, and her work there focuses on decolonization and self-determination, campaigns for indigenous people in the Pacific. She stands in solidarity with indigenous communities worldwide, united in efforts to protect Mother Earth from human destruction. Very warm welcome, Rosa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chantel.
Our second speaker, if you're very active in the ecumenical movement across the Pacific region, will be no stranger to you. I have great pleasure in introducing Reverend James Bagwan. He is currently in his 2nd term as the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches. The PCC is the peak ecumenical or church body in the Pacific, with 35 Protestant and Catholic denominations and churches, and 11 National Council of Churches across 19 Pacific Island countries and territories, from Mohanui in the east, to Hawaii and Marshall Islands in the north, to Tana Papua in the west, to Aotearoa in the south. Its members' congregations account for some 80% of the Pacific. 4 indigenous churches in Papua are members of PCC, and the West Papua Council of Churches is also affiliated with PCC. So, welcome, Reverend James Bhagwan. We realize you just gotten back from your journey. Welcome back. Thank you for making the time for us this morning.
Thank you, Chantal, and wah to Rosa.
Thank you. We're getting closer now, and just a little bit of description as we go into our session. There are 3 questions, 3 of the main questions we're going to be asking our speakers. We'll ask the question to each of the speakers, and then we give 5 minutes for response, and then we'll move on to the next question. We'll move the questions around. Just a word on your questions, your own questions that we welcome very much. If you can hold them for after the speakers have presented, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. But we invite you to put them in the chat. Joshua will be loading them as we go into it. Okay. Thank you. We'll move into our first question, and we're going to ask Rosa. With her extensive experience doing this work on decolonization, struggles on the ground, working in West Papua, coming across to Fiji, the question is, how can INGOs approach the topic of self-determination, and how is it related to decolonizing their work? Thank you, Rosa.
Pinaka Santel, greetings from West Papua. It's a big question, actually. But before I respond to the question, since you mentioned about the Freeport and big mining, I will start with quoting the words of Tuareg Narkime, chief of Amume tribes, the one who, the custodian of the Nemangkawi mountain, where now the biggest mining company is operating there. In 1994, Tuareg Narkime organized and mobilized his community, and they walk barefoot to the Freeport mining office in place in Timika. And this is what he said to the officers and also among his people. This is what he said: "Gentlemen, I am so angry with God. Why has he created such beautiful mountains, valleys, and rivers, rich with minerals, and placed us here, the indigenous people, in this place that attracts so many people from around the world to come exploit our resources and kill us?" So that was the very short, it is a short quote, but for me and for many of us West Papuans, it's very significant. And the reason why we are fighting now is because God provide us with very rich natural resources, minerals, and therefore people coming from outside, the big companies, set up their food and then build something, exploit our resources, and at the same time also conflict and violence happening even until today. So when we talk about how could INGO actually respond to the question or the issue of self-determination, it's I think it's back to the organization or to the NGOs, the principles of the NGOs itself. Either how far they understand about the perspective of self-determination. Because when NGOs like international NGOs want to work on that issue, they should understand why people, especially on the grassroots or indigenous community, keep sounding and talking and fighting for self-determination, their right to self-determination. And self-determination should be seen as a bigger concept. It's not only specific on a particular issue like political self-determination, but also, as you mentioned, Chantel, that in the context of countries already get their independence, self-determination struggle is still ongoing because we look at other aspects. You know, I can see like people in Namosi, for example, with their mining issues, and also people who are fighting for their seabed mining, for other issue, climate change. It's all about self-determination. So now, how could the INGO actually put this perspective in their mission? I can say the word mission because if in every organization they always have a kind of vision, mission, and objective that why you want to do that. I think that should be the first thing that should be done in any international NGOs if they want to entry to the space, like to work on self-determination and decolonization. And I think it should be something that necessary for me to see that all organizations should have that kind of perspective, because international organization will work together or connect with the national or local organization, and the principles of self-determination and decolonization, I think, should be there. Maybe that's the first response, and we can explore later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosa. Those are some timely reminders for us. We're going to go now to Reverend James. What are your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal, and thank you to Joshua and the team from Oxfam and the Pacific for this opportunity and for having Rosa and I on in this very, very important conversation. I think when we are looking at the issue of self-determination, and particularly in the context of decolonizing the work of international non-governmental organizations, there are a number of challenges that come up straight away. In fact, the first step is to recognize that in one way, international or INGOs, by their very nature, if not careful, can actually become colonizing because of standards of methodology. One project program concept is designed somewhere else and implemented somewhere else. And that's very, very dangerous. So when we are talking about, colonization, we are talking about, and, Christianity has a lot to account for in this, particularly Western Christianity, that began right at the very beginning by looking and taking the word dominion to mean ownership. And as things shifted in the Enlightenment, in the 18th century, certain ways of knowing and being became what was important. And so, we need to recognize that when we're talking about decolonization, when we're talking about self-determination, we are talking about the community being at the heart of everything. Beginning, as you know very well, Chantal, with the right to free, prior, and informed consent on anything that happens in that community's space, land space, sea space, air space. And, we need to recognize that we have shifted from this understanding at community level, indigenous and local community level, of people being guardians of their community to stewards of their community, to very much from a Eurocentric Western understanding of dominion as control and ownership. And so right from the beginning, we're talking about the issue of equity here. We are talking about people who remove the equity of the people. Self-determination, as we all know, is a human right. It is a social, political, economic, cultural right for people to determine their lives as they see fit in their context. And so when I was reflecting about what you were sharing about Fiji's independence, and then the fact that we have this food culture, and everybody sort of says, "Oh, we're independent now, 1970, and that's it." The process of decolonizing never really continued after that because we only focused on the instruments of independence. Our political systems had been colonized. Our cultural and social systems had been colonized. Our economic systems had been colonized. Even, to a certain extent, our spiritual, religious systems had also been colonized. Education systems had been colonized. And so for our people, it's about how do we shift those narratives? How do we ensure equity? And so for international NGOs, for INGOs, it's about listening to the community and recognizing what is at the heart of each community's needs, which is really that development narratives need to resonate in the well-being of the community. And capitalism has a lot to play in that because we tend to equate development with economics, but there is a need for us to figure out how do we unweave all of that. And we have the issue of Tanah Papua or West Papua that Rosa shared. You mentioned the current issue in Kanaki. We have Maui Nui, also known as French Polynesia, and even Hawaii, which is a colony, basically a state, has been incorporated as a state of the United States of America. We have, an unincorporated territory or incorporated territory in American Samoa and Guam. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, for INGOs is, as you mentioned, the amount of funding that is available that they are able to, as INGOs, engage in. The strings that come attached with that funding. And I think that's something that's very, very important for us to recognize. If we are looking to decolonize the work, how do we, and it's not just INGOs, it's even our local NGOs, as we have experienced, where our funders try to direct our level of work. And we've seen that very, very recently in the shift that a lot of funding agencies or partners move from funding organizations for work that they propose to do to thematic areas. And in that, they dictate what can be done by a particular organization. And so how do INGOs that, because of their nature of size, need a considerable amount of funding to not just operate, but remain active, take ownership of what they're able to do and not be directed or controlled by their funding agencies. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chantal.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Already it's Rosa and Reverend James is only question one, but thank you. It's already bringing out some very interesting points for consideration for INGOs and even local NGOs. We'll get back into this discussion, and to give us some time, perhaps we jump to the next question. And again, I'm just reminding everyone who's on board here, a very interesting input already from our two speakers to bring your questions to Reverend James. As activists in the Pacific and around the world call for free West Papua, what often like Oxfam is whole area, is it their place to be echoing those calls, or do they need to be leading a different perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge for international NGOs, and really it comes down to their mandates, and what is the purpose of their existence. You know, and it is very easy to to move with the issues as they arise. But also we note that sometimes organizations shift their mission and their agenda based on where the funding streams are coming from. And you know, we've seen that in the past. I would say that every aspect of life is an aspect of has an aspect of decolonization and self-determination. As I mentioned, the different spaces in which self-determination and decolonization apply. And so there are many ways that INGOs can engage on the issues. And, you know, even if their specific mandates do not allow them or call for them to speak out on certain things. But the point here I want to make is that self-determination is a human right. So if you're a human right-based organization, that's your starting point. Self-determination, decolonization is about justice for people. So if you're about justice, then that's your entry point. We are talking about indigenous and local communities. So if that's your area of engagement, that's your starting point. It's being very clear and having those discussions on what is it that you are doing, and then how does that resonate with the issue of decolonization and self-determination. And I think, you know, often we, particularly these days, you know, in the social media world we live in, it's very easy for us just to all go on the same track. But each of us have key areas that we can engage in that provide an alternative perspective and broaden the issue of decolonization. You know, we, in the issue of West Papua, we are talking about political decolonization with Indonesia's basic invasion of Tanah Papua. But we're also talking about the human rights abuses that have taken place. We're also talking about the ecological destruction that's taking place. This is also a biodiversity issue, a climate change issue. It's an issue about health. It's an issue about education. It's an issue about women's rights. It's an issue about child protection. In the context of Kanaki, it's the same thing. It's about, you know, political rights, sure, but it's about equity. Equity for indigenous communities who see a disparity in wealth, a disparity in so many areas of life. And so for me, I really think that it's about each organization looking to see where does this work connect with, and how do we engage on that issue. And you know, we have activist groups that do their work. We have you know, other areas of organizations that can do capacity building for communities, that to help them and support them in their work for self-determination. You know, and we have people who are able to do political negotiations at track 1 level or track 1.5, track 2. So I think it's really about the INGO being very clear and being very honest about its mandates, and then being, most importantly, being true to that mandate. And that also takes courage, because you know, for INGOs, relationships at a high level are very, very important, and there is a lot of influence and moving around. And so maintaining that courage, and, you know, I was reflecting on, and I'm not going to preach today because it's not Sunday, but Psalm 24, verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and all who lived in it. Verse 2, for he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Those two verses are actually on the edifice of the Royal Stock Exchange in England, in London. And as I said, that's showing how faith was captured and colonized, and those who profess that faith now take ownership. But the next few verses talk about clean hands and clean hearts in engagement. And I think this is the very, very important issue. Whatever work we do, particularly when it's on self-determination, we've got to keep our hands and our hearts clean. And I'm using that metaphor, but it's really about integrity and institutional integrity. It's listening to what the communities are asking you to help them with or support them in, allowing them to take the leadership and determine the agenda, and then looking to see what part we can play. I think these days one of the challenges, just to end this my intervention or my response, is branding. Everybody, sometimes brandings are good when we put out a collective statement like the Pringo Alliance did with all the logos. It shows about so many people being involved. And sometimes we want to show that we are being involved in this work, when actually we need to be doing some of that work a little bit quieter and deeper, and allowing our people to either be in the forefront and lead, or we come to the forefront to protect our people. So there's there's that intention that needs to be understood as well. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Reverend James. Some very thoughtful, very thought-provoking comments you're already making there. Rosa, what do you have to say? Thank you.
Yes, I'm agree with what Reverend James mentioned about mandates and everything. And self-determination is a human right. So I think in many international NGOs, I think human right, even though they are not focusing on human right, but human right is a basic principles that all the organizations should have. And when we look at the human right, no matter it's a political context or other context, but I think human rights and basic human rights of people who are affected by conflict or by any cause of colonization, I think it should be the priority. So I just want to continue, especially in the context of conflicts, violence conflicts, like what happened in Palestine, in Gaza, in West Papua, and also in Kanaki at the moment. I think the first reaction that should become from the international NGO is to do the response on humanitarian assistance. I think that's like a principle things that people have, like organizations should have. When there is an attack, there is a people victims of the violence, the first things is humanitarian assistance. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not happened. It's normally churches and some locals NGO will be the first one who come on the front line and trying to fix everything. And then trying to engage with the international NGO. Sometimes it's a bit difficult, especially when we look at the situation in a conflict area. When something happened, the first thing is all the staff of international NGOs will be evacuated. So then who will do that job? The principles of humanitarian access. I think just like in Kanaki, I believe that all the evacuations happen as soon as the violence and the riots happen. So I think that's kind of a critiques from my personal perspective as a West Papuan who experienced violence. Sometimes people don't know where to go. They know that there are some international NGOs based in there, but then they cannot reach the international NGOs people, and they will go to the church and local civil society organizations. So I think that one thing, the first things, and the second things in terms of the conflict, is it possible for international NGO to use their capacity, their access also to support, to advocate the human rights situation there and linking with the international human rights laws? Because I know that even though international NGOs focusing on gender-based violence, for example, but it's still linked to the context of the conflict. For example, what happened to the women and children victims by the violence, state violence. And that should be part of the conversation. Because when we talk about gender-based violence, state violence is also gender-based, because it's a patriarchal system that in our system, the government system, the state system, that um, normally military will target women and children because they are the weakness group of the society, of the people. So I think it should be under that perspective. So we don't ask you to change your mandate, but just focusing on your mandate, but broadening your perspective that this is very much about human rights, the violent state violence, and also like the response to the humanitarian access. In West Papua, for example, until now we have almost 80,000 IDPs, international displaced persons. There is no response from Indonesia as a state to look after these IDPs, and they are still looking for shelters, support on other access, but local NGOs, they are not able to reach them because of the geographical situation, but also with the presence of the Indonesian military that block all the access, and also because lack of the resources. So what I know from the ground is that churches is always the one who try to provide everything, but churches is very limited. They don't have resources. They work with the local NGOs, try to support, but it's still limited. So how could international NGO who have enough resources to reach the local actors, stakeholders who can directly um, distribute the resources and support to the community that affected by conflict? I cannot imagine what happened in Gaza, because from my conversation with some of my friends who live in Ramallah and also in other parts, it's so difficult for them even to make sure that they have enough food. Many organizations coming from abroad, coming with the humanitarian assistance, but actually it's not reaching all the community that affected. It's only some part that popular, like I can say it's popular, like when all the medias and international media is there, then everyone will go to that spot, and then other peoples are left behind. So I think it's also about branding. I just want to take what Reverend James mentioned about the branding. Sometimes we want to do that because we get the branding. We have our logos there. We can put it on our report, but then we don't really realize how far our intervention is actually make a contribution to the people who are affected. So I think that one thing. Um, and also in the context of conflict, I think it's important if the INGO has capacity and resources to provide a space for uh, people who are affected, or the process of dialogue or conflict resolution. Like for us in West Papua, always back to West Papua, that it's everyone knows that the conflict is still ongoing and people want to resolve the conflict, but no one really wants to take the lead or collaborate to open space for dialogue. We talk about conflict resolution in a high level, like in international seminars everywhere, like everyone talk about conflict resolution, but what about the local initiative? What about people's initiative? They'll try to push the agenda of dialogue, and then the lack of resources just to bring people to come together and talk about the conflict and try to fix the conflict or deal with the conflict, even to build their capacity to have a negotiation with the state or with other international mechanism. I think it's very important. And if the international NGOs has that capacity, then that should be the area that can be one of the contribution. For example, for the dialogue, for the peace building, peace. We talk about peace building. It's so big and broad. What about providing a small space for people uh, to start the process of sometimes just a reconciliation is something else, but the process of understanding the conflict and find a way to deal with the conflict. I believe that many community who are affected and also stakeholders at the ground, at the local level and national level, has this initiative. It's just in terms of getting support from other bigger stakeholders like international NGOs. And another thing is also, sorry, I take it a bit long, but I think it's also about respecting indigenous knowledge and practice. Sometimes I see that international NGOs will use the same term. I mean, in the Pacific, sorry to say that, but in the Pacific now everyone use the term Talanoa, or maybe Kakala too. Sorry to say that, but it's just to bring us to reflection that how far international NGOs understand about that term in the indigenous context, what it means. When we talk about Talanoa, what it means. When you talk about talk story, what it means. Is it just a sexy term that now being used by all the international communities just because it exists in the Pacific and we want to engage with them? So we use that term. I think it should be part of the reflection in every organizations, that either we really practice that, we really respecting that, and when we take that term into our organization, do we have a proper kind of asking for permission to use that term? I think it's a principles of respecting indigenous practice and knowledge is important. Everyone want to use that term because it's popular, but it's something that we need to come through the process. Like, you really part of that conversation and you ask in a proper, appropriate way. I think it's very important. And also like it's very important to decolonize the perspective of the NGOs, international NGOs or local national NGOs, decolonizing our mindset first, our perspective first. And I think in the Pacific, we are very, very popular now with the decolonizing concept, decolonizing theology, decolonizing gender perspective, decolonizing economy, all these kind of terms. I think it should be landed, including decolonizing our understanding of self-determination and the struggle of people who are affected by the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a lot of stuff. Again, question number 2. I'm very excited about this. And I hope that the international NGOs on this, including Oxfam, are taking some notes. It's a really interesting discussion. Thank you. We're going to move immediately to our third question. Rosa, we'll stay with you, then we'll go with Reverend James. We'll stay here and keep going, and then we'll summarize as we reach the end of it. I saw some of you taking notes. Reverend James is going to be saying a lot, so this is good. Sometimes the issues like those faced in West Papua and in Gaza, and again in Kanaki, these issues, as you know, we listened to the two of you, and we already know that it's incredibly polarizing. We already talking before we came on this, the show, this dialogue started. They educated me on this thing called the Zoom bombing. We're practically preparing for that, and why not? It's the example of what is incredibly polarizing, to the point where you want to disturb, you want to try to stop conversations from happening. So we know that they're polarizing. The thing is, how do INGOs respond in a way that is respectful? And this is, listen to this, the two of you. How do INGOs respond in a way that is both respectful but firm? Yeah. And how do you think that these INGOs can determine their North Star? Yeah. Rosa, we'll go with you first, and then Reverend James. Thank you.
Yes, it's a big question. So sometimes everyone reacted when violence happened, and then suddenly we're, oh, there is a conflict there. When the situation calm and people is trying to push their agenda of self-determination, like political self-determination, particularly, not many attention given. So it's really oh yeah, we know that in Palestine there is an issue, people fighting between Israel and Palestine, and then suddenly when the bomb happened and everyone just look at that. In West Papua, we know that there is an ongoing conflict, and it's like we, as a human rights defenders from West Papua, we keep sounding that, hey, come on, come. We have IDPs here, we have armed conflict here, we have military operations here, but no response. Just, oh yeah, it's a business of the Indonesia because that's internal issues. Okay, in Kanaki, when people pushing the agenda of referendum, we follow it on the media and we said, oh yeah, the result is like this. And then suddenly, when the things happen, the youth took initiative to bring the attention, then everyone look at that, and suddenly Australia, New Zealand came with assistance, which is good, but in some way it's not good because, why should we wait until people die? Why should we wait until people being killed and then we react? I think it's a big question about the sensitivity of our humanity, our sense of being a human being. It's very important. We operate in international NGOs or national NGOs. It's as an organization, but the organization is contained of people who have their heart, their mind. I think it's very important to always have that kind of sense. So we're not waiting until people die, everyone killed, and then we react. But I think it should be started in the beginning when the organization decided to work in some certain areas, that they should know about the context, the conflict or any local context. If there is an issue around political self-determination and conflict, so then it can help them to frame the way they operate there, to build a bridge. So it's not always follow the funding, what the donors wants, because donors is also play their politics, and the money to the donors is also come from the states, right? Like a big state money, they put it into the funding organization. So I think it's a politics that we should actually be able to deal with when we understand the context. If we want to operate, I can give an example from my personal experience working with one of the biggest government agency working on gender-based violence in West Papua, and I was a consultant at the time. And the tools, the requirement is so not contextual. They're expecting us to go to the garden when people gardening and ask them to sign, put the signature, put the timestamp, and we said, no way, we cannot distract people when they do their gardening. They are digging the soil, planting the sweet potato. How could you guys expecting us to do that? It's not possible. So this kind of, understanding and all the assessment done by consultant or companies or third party from outside, not from local based civil society organization, for example, just because I don't know why. Maybe because they see that the local NGOs has not capacity to do that. We also operate in PMA, all these tools of development that we know. So I think that kind of relationship between international NGOs who channeling um, the support resources to the local NGOs, I think it should be clear. It should be a mutual kind of relationship. So you don't expecting people to fill the form when people in my village they don't read and write. And how could you expecting them to sign or to it's not. I think it should be contextual. So I think the relationship between organizations, NGOs, and the local NGOs in supporting some particular issues and context is very important. When you know that in West Papua, for example, when you do the gender-based violence discussion, You don't do it in a public space because military and police officer will come and sit in and listen to you. So how could you expect people to share their story of being, victims of the domestic violence or even the state violence? I think it should be, very good in terms of understanding. Just like I had a chance to talk also to my friends in Kanaki, the women's network there, and they also said that sometimes their voice is not heard, even though they know that there are some big organizations, NGOs operate there, but they are very pro-French. So they will keep maintaining the French power. So then the voice of the Kanak is not heard. And they always said the Kanak is, they are the one who create all the chaos. They are brutal. They are, all the bad kind of terms given to the Kanak people just because they try to raising the voice so then the world can hear. So that's when I said that, it was quiet for a while. And then when the youth started to do the riot, I know it's a violence, but they know I believe that they want to attract the attention. That's why that's one of a way to attract people's attention. So I think it's just like also in Palestine, people are suffering a lot. And even until today, we always think about what the Israel feel about that. If we do the support to Palestine struggle, we always think about Israel feelings, not about Palestine's people's feeling, the Palestinians feeling. I think it's very important to look at. It's not a religion conflict. I think I should state it clear because I'm in solidarity with the Palestine struggle. It's not a religion conflict. It's a conflict. It's an occupation. It's an occupation, and we can see the interest of natural resources, water resources, and other resources in the Palestinian territory is one of the biggest things why the conflict is still ongoing. So it's not about religion conflict. We should, because we also have a Christians in Palestine. My friend who are a lawyer, human rights lawyer in the Palestine, until today, she cannot move everywhere, and she's a Christian, very devoted Christian Palestinian. So I think I just want to put it there. So it's not about religion, it's about occupation. And occupation is always hurting for people who have rights on their territory. Thank you, Santel. I give it back to you. Sorry, taking a long time.
Thank you, Rosa. We know that there's a lot that you can share because you have that experience also going in on the ground. We'll turn this time over to Reverend James, please.
Yeah, maybe I just pick up from where Rosa ended. And that's the thing. It's sitting where we are, unless we're from that place, we can complicate it forever, the situation. Yes, there is a religious connotation to the issue in Gaza. Because in the Far East or Middle East, Near East, religion and politics and people have shaped that area for centuries, for millennia. And how do we work within that space where lines were drawn by colonial powers without consultation of anybody in that space? And so, I think one of the things we need to keep in mind that, you mentioned the Nakaba at the beginning, Chantal, in your introduction. And that's the fact that we need to go to the Nakaba. We need to go further back, as far back as we can go to start to understand the issue in Palestine, between Israel and Palestine, Gaza, and Israel, Lebanon, all of those issues. And we tend to have often a very simplistic emotional response rather than a thought out response to some of these issues. And I think that's the issue. I mean, each generation of us here will know this story of Gaza and the story of Palestine from when we were young people. or children. It comes in waves as crisis happens. There is a new awakening. And sometimes in our social media, we just go crazy because it's the new thing we've just heard. But this has been an ongoing issue. This was happening before Fiji became independent, before many Pacific Islands became independent. So we've got to understand that this is something that's been going on. The same is the situation with the occupied territories in the Pacific. Now, and that's why I think what Rosa has shared is very important. We've got to understand, first and foremost, that this is a humanitarian crisis. And we have to deal with the humanitarian crisis, and then we look at the injustice that caused that crisis. The recognition that this is a human rights issue. It's not a religious issue. It's not even a political issue. This is about justice, right? If you analyze questions of why is Netanyahu doing this when he's about to be indicted for things, wars distract people very easily, as we have seen. And, it could be as simple as that. But I think, if we look at the issue of Tanah Papua, it was a big issue for many, many years, from the 60s. And then it went silent because the people were silenced. And then, we start to see the resurgence. We see the ULMWP being formed as to try and create a political body for negotiations. We see the churches really stepping up from Papua to take the message to us and to the World Council of Churches. And so there's a new wave. Same with Kanaki. I mean, we are talking about the recent issue on the electoral laws, but it goes back to the referendums. It goes back to what led to the Noumea Accords and the Matignon Accords before that. We talk about the protests exploding these last 2 weeks, but in April, the people were marching, peacefully protesting, peacefully calling out. And you reach a flashpoint, and then we all start to pay attention. So this is something that's very important. We have to pay attention to. The Pacific Conference of Churches, we had our General Assembly in Kanaki last year. And that was an action of self-determination to say, you are part of the Pacific, you are not part of France. And, the customary Senate were in tears when our former moderator, the moderator at the time, made that at when we had our traditional Fijian our Sevu Sevu, when we went to present as part of our opening protocols. Of course, Kanaki and Mahinui are on the UN decolonization list. There is a process underway. So we can find political solutions, and we can pressure and push for those political solutions. For Tanah Papua, it's a different case altogether. And so because it's a different case, the Indonesian government can play many more games than France can, because they can suppress and oppress and repress the people. I think if we're looking at the role of INGOs responding, I think it's always important to note that everyone has best intentions, and I applaud that, and I'm grateful for those intentions. Everybody has the heart. We are moved as Pacific people and human beings, by our heart. But we have to remember our principles of first do no harm. So before engaging mouth and hand, maybe the brain needs to come in to connect as well, to say, okay, is there a possibility that our actions will cause harm to the very people we are trying to help, or get in the way, right? And the second is, how do we do good? So, for churches, we use the See Judge Act, or, data and research, social political analysis, reflection, and then action. We go through that process, and it's a continuous process. Macron just left Kanaki, and he's left behind these 3 white French men only, to handle the negotiations going forward, without even acknowledging or listening to the cry of the people. He's had separate meetings, but maybe this flashpoint is what the world needed to, what the Kanak people needed to bring this attention to the world. And so, INGOs need to be very clear again. What is your mandate? How do you engage? And how do you, first of all, do no harm in this process? I think that's something that's very, very important. And the last thing, perhaps, we need to recognize that this whole planet has been colonized. And we're in the neo-colonization of corporate capture. And that's who's running the thing. Even in climate change, it's colonization because, as Rosa said, it's only when things explode, then what people are doing is dealing with the issue, not with the symptoms, not with the underlying cause. And I think that's very important for us to recognize. That's why so much climate action and investment is going not into mitigation. There's no big global push from governments and corporate companies to phase out fossil fuel. But yes, we'll give you money for your seawalls and for your loss and damage. It's the same principle being applied in this situation. So I'll stop it there because we'd like to, of course, take questions.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I start preaching.
Thank you. Unfortunately, because we've been listening so intently to the two of you, we're going to be running out of time for questions, but there are questions coming through. If you've been listening carefully to what they've been saying, there seems to be quite a lot of, how do you say, similarities and a lot of links to the two of them, both Rosa and James, and why not? It's been a long struggle for them as well. And the lessons that are coming out for the INGOs, congratulations to Oxfam for even going through this. It has been a big listening exercise for Oxfam. It's almost like a total evaluation in one spot. So that's good. Some of the things that have come out. I'm just going to lean on Joshua right now. Do we have time for summary and a question, or are we going right into question? Please bear with us.
We can do the one question from Semi on the chat, and then we'll have to move to summary, please.
Okay, thank you. We'll give it to Semi Turanga. Are you still on here if you'd like to pose your question? Thank you. Semi? Would you like to ask your question?
Hello, Mbula, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I put my question in the chat. It's just on holding international NGOs accountable on issues of self-determination when it comes to Gaza and Palestine compared to, Kanaki West Papua. Is there sort of a difference or double standard that maybe the panel see there, or is it just purely down to a lack of consistent movement building for that part of the world and for self-determination in that part of the world?
Thank you for that question, Semi. We're going to give it to the panelists if they would like. I think the question is about accountability and maybe the double standards that he's referring to. We're talking about Kanaki and West Papua, and where does that leave us with Gaza and Palestine? Although I did hear both of them be talking about it. Over to you, Rosa and Reverend.
Yeah, okay, I'll do the response first. I think my assumption of, it's I should do more analyzing situation, what happened in the Pacific in terms of responding to the issues. But I think in terms of your questions about movement building and why it seems like in the Pacific, people more focusing on Kanaki and West Papua and probably Maui Nui as well, and previously Bougainville. I think my first response is maybe because we are in the Pacific as a part of the Pacific, and it's more closer to us emotionally and culturally more connected. So people familiar with the issue and they have a personal reflection on that. So it's much more easier to mobilize and to build a movement. And when we educate people in terms of movement building, at least based on my experience working for the last few years on promoting West Papua issue. I think it's because of that sentiment. So people easy to understand. Like when we talk about that, people can visualize that being part of the story, connect themselves directly to the story compared to the Palestine, which is quite far. I think that's first observation. And the second thing, I think people probably we need to do more education on the issue, like Palestine, what is the root cause, why, and because many of us probably look at that issue as a religion issue and rather than human rights and self-determination issue. I think more and more information distributed, I think I think it will get there. We will get there, because I remember first time when we also working on West Papua, it takes quite sometimes to actually bring the issue and even to Kanaki issue or Maui Nui. Not many people in the Pacific, especially like young people, they don't know. They cannot make a difference between Kanaki and New Caledonia because Kanaki is the indigenous name of the nation. So I think the knowledge sharing is very important in terms of educating our people in the region, especially like in Fiji or in other part of the region. So then people understand. I think when people understand that, then it will be easy for them to contribute, to participate, to support. And I think the role of NGOs, international NGOs, also very important in terms of distributing information or even create space for people to learn about the issue in a bigger context, not only what happened in the region, but Palestine is quite popular issue at the moment in terms of the tension, the conflict. So I think a lot of information spread out in the internet. We can also access many information. I think it's about how we consolidate, we organize the knowledge, the information, so then we can share with our people, especially young people, the students, so they understand that, and then they can decide whether they want to contribute, how could they contribute. I think that's it. So yeah, I'm not sure about the NGOs double standard or not, but I think at least I'm speaking from my experience. I'm also part of the Palestine activist network that I'm, solidarity network. I also have to educate myself. So I think,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you,
Rosa.
sorry, too long.
It's okay. We'll just go one more to Reverend James before we summarize. Thank you.
Thanks, Chantal. And thank you, Rosa, for engaging on that question. I think, maybe age is as we get older, we can remember things from the past. But I would say that in the context of Palestine, the solidarity has been there for a very, very long time. And there is global solidarity, and there are global movements for these issues, in around the world. Yet for our specific issues, there is not much engagement globally. We are left alone to deal with these issues. And so that is why we pay our attention, we put our effort here, because, when things explode, again, and things explode on social media, etc., things become flavor of the month. It was like Black Lives Matter. Who's still posting on Black Lives Matter in the Pacific? We went from Black Lives Matter to Papua Lives Matter and moved to other things. These issues that come and go, and these are coming from a global perspective, but it's very important as Pacific people in terms of the decolonization and self-determination process for our region, that we also include and pay strong attention to the issues here in our region, because no one else in the world is doing that. And so that's our responsibility. So it's very important to be in solidarity and speak on all communities that are experiencing this. And, you know, we have Gaza, but there are other places that we don't even hear about because information is controlled. And so we've got to pay attention to that. So it's about, for us, I think it's where we are, what we can do. And then for those who engage in the international space, outside of the region and more globally and more internationally, that's who we call on to engage in our spaces. So for example, for the churches in the Pacific, we have the World Council of Churches that engages on the issues of Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, Armenia, what's happening in India, and other persecutions of communities. So, you know, we act in solidarity, but we are the ones who, if we don't act, you know, that was the saying in the 80s for Palestine. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? So we have to apply that principle to what's happening here, because until this thing exploded in Kanaki, there was no international visibility to this issue. It's the same with Papua. For them to try and get international visibility, it's not very strong, right? So that's why we have to engage in that space. Thank you so much. And of course, Aotearoa at the moment, which is going through some serious issues.
Thank you. Thank you to both our speakers. At the moment, we're just going to wrap it up before we come back and give them the final word if they want. But I think it's quite clear when you're listening. Remember, we had said from the beginning that we're going to go through this. We're going to go through this emoting and, you know, even here with this accountability, local NGOs, international NGOs. The question was, even though the human rights abuses, it was coming down to the role of the INGOs in these spaces and being accountable to Indigenous. And I think that the two panelists have been quite clear, the speakers have been quite clear about the things they were saying around their own principles, clarity around their own concept of self-determination. One, in terms of the theory, it seems like, but the other is walking their talk on the ground. They were talking about INGO mandate and brought in the concept of funding, you know, who is pulling the strings about the funding coming into the INGOs if you recognize that they're the ones who have a different layer of funding than local NGOs. I think Reverend James spoke about clean hands and clean heart. Rosa, when they're talking about branding, where are we putting the emphasis on issues? If we're talking about INGOs, again, using their capacity to link to international instruments. And I think this is something perhaps for Oxfam in the Pacific to consider. And it raises a question for me. I was asking through all of this. So is it INGOs are not engaging at all on self-determination? Is that it? Is it they're not engaging? Or are they choosing where to engage? And this is where the lessons are coming from our speakers at the moment. They may be a little tough to hear, but it's very timely as well. We need help on the ground in terms of human rights laws. If we're talking about international displaced persons, areas where the local NGOs cannot reach. Are there conversations happening between the INGOs and the local NGOs who are on the ground to make sure that the assistance you want to give on the ground is getting to the right people? I think the lesson that we have taken here is to make sure that we are listening closely to the local counterparts on the ground and doing a bit of soul searching in terms of the INGOs themselves. What is it that we are on about when it comes to self-determination? And also recognizing, like the two speakers have been saying consistently, that self-determination should not just be viewed from the lens of politics, but also through the lens of humanitarian and human rights. Self-determination really is about human rights. And once you've expanded to being about human rights, then the floor is all open. It doesn't have to be restrictive anymore. It could be about women's rights, environment rights. It could be about anything. And again, it comes back to the INGO and perhaps your own political will internally. Are you willing to go down that road? Are you willing to take it on in terms of human rights issue instead of just seeing it as political? On that note, apologize if it didn't capture every single thing that you wanted. Rosa and Reverend James, just one more quick last comment before we end this. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do first. So self-determination is a human rights, is a fundamental rights for any human being, especially for the indigenous peoples who are affected by colonial systems. Either it's ongoing colonial or neo-colonialism. And that's also, I just want to call for support for Kanaki, which is still ongoing at the moment. Please pay attention to Kanaki's struggle, West Papua and Maui Nui. Don't forget that even though it's very silent, but there are a lot of things going on down there. We need to be aware of that. So yes, calling for solidarity, and also for Palestine, please channel your solidarity to any Palestine solidarity group that you can connect online. That's a big space that you can join, but also please keep educating our people about the self-determination struggle, about the fighting of Palestinian, Kanaki, West Papua, Maui Nui, and others. Thank you, Naka.
Reverend James?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to Rosa for being such an excellent co-panelist. Thank you, Chantal, for guiding us in this and weaving the things together. Thank you to Oxfam International for, Oxfam in the Pacific, Joshua and the team and everyone there for inviting me into this panel. There's, Rosa mentioned it, Chantal mentioned it, when we talk about Talanoa, it's not just an hour or two. And, these kinds of things need longer conversations. But we've started, and maybe we can have another one to continue. Or we just find a space to sit together and talk about how we can weave a conspiracy of goodness in our region and in the world. The work will continue, and in every community, in every country, in every part of this planet, there are communities that are suffering and struggling. And everyone in the global south, and to a certain extent also in the global north, we have to recognize that everyone's been colonized. And there are many victims in neo-colonialism that we need to think about. But let's start with what we can do and what we can do together here in the Pacific. Thank you so much.
And on that note, on behalf of everybody who was listening here and who's still on here, thank you very much to Rosa and Reverend James. Thank you for your expertise, your experience, your patience in sharing with us all the experiences that you had. In fact, just some of it, I know that. Thank you so much also to Oxfam in the Pacific for having the courage to put yourself out there and ask these questions here. We hope that it was also a learning for you, as it was for us. And in the future, if there's any more chance of us having these conversations, perhaps in person, that would be excellent. But on this note, everybody take care and have a very peaceful weekend. Goodbye.